Welcome to Breaking the Silence of Design. I'm Karen Compton, and I am joined today by Senior Principal and Director Craig Atkinson of IBI Group here in Los Angeles. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
You and I have had many conversations about race and racism in the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks. What was the most difficult week? And then I want to go to how are you using that energy to go forward?
I think the most difficult week for me was about week 2. And I think it was because I was getting calls from everywhere. I was getting calls from the president of the company, from individuals within the firm, from everybody. And it just got to a point where it was just overload, retelling my story over and over and over again. And I think I hit a wall. I hit a wall with just not wanting to talk about one more person about race.
So when you hit that wall, what did you finally do with that energy? Because you love to run.
Yeah, I did a lot of running. You
did a lot of running, I know.
I did a lot of running. I put in a lot of miles those 2 weeks.
And then after you finally finished that run, what did you do with that energy? Where did you kind of take it and pivot it or invest it? What was your reflection?
I think it totally changed for me, quite frankly. I think it was a town hall on the AIA did, along with NOMA. And I think sometimes when you've reached the position that I've reached, you forget the struggle that it took to get there.
Yeah.
So for me, when it started to take off for me was listening to young people that look like me 30 years later, and they were going through some of the same feelings and the same things. And that sparked my energy. So then it was about, kind of reinvigorating with NOMA. It was about getting my firm on track with, our task force and doing the hard work. And I think something Gabrielle said earlier, I think something she said was interesting to me is that I feel like I need to put my heart into it, not just throw dollars over the fence.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's about being there. It's about showing kids that look like me that you can do it, you can do things. So for me, that's what's really kind of created my energy.
Now, you're in an interesting situation. You get a seat at the table.
I do.
And because you get that seat at the table, what has that meant in terms of this task force that you've alluded to? Why don't you talk a little bit about what is the task force and what's your seat in it?
So in the very beginning, the president of our company called me and said, what do we do? And so we talked. We had a lot of talks over those first 2 weeks. And so we came out with our statement. But what was important about our statement for me was that it had to be followed by action.
Yeah.
It had to be followed by action next week, a month from now, 2 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. We have to continue the action. So I told him I wasn't going to be a part of it unless the action ensued. And so there are things that we said we were going to do, whether it was partnership with NOMA, working on the pipeline, doing a variety of different things, scholarships for people of color. And so the task force is kind of a short duration thing to make sure that we're living up to those initial ideals. We have some longer range plans in terms of diversity and inclusion and an inclusion council and all those things that are going to make up our overall program. But for right now, the task force is charged with making sure we're honoring our commitments that we put forth to the world. So that's my role in it. I'm leading that task force right now and will ultimately be part of the Inclusion Council, I think. They've kind of already asked me, and
as if you don't have enough things to do.
As far as running a business and doing all those kinds of things. But I think it's important for kids to see someone like me.
How large is this task force? Because what I would really want people to understand is they don't necessarily have to have a large group of individuals in order to begin to take and make change.
The beauty of this firm is what's interesting is the task force is 8 people, and there's a lot of people that are supporting the task force, from marketing, from legal to HR, right? Because we do work in a legal environment. But what I found out through all of this is I've been meeting with a group of 27 people within the firm that has created their own action plan that we're now bringing into the group. And so there are groups all over our firm that are meeting about this. So I think part of the task force vision is to bring them together and to create action beyond what we even thought we were going to do. So it's been interesting to watch this come about. So my role is I'm kind of at the center, but just like I think Gabrielle talked about again, is what really is starting to get to me is that there are a lot of people that don't look like me that are part of these task force, and I've told them we need you.
Yeah.
Right. We can't do this on our own. Right. A young African American woman that works for me said, "Why does it have to all fall on us?"
Yeah.
And so I'm very cognizant of that. Right. Like we need to have broad spectrum support to defeat this injustice because we didn't do it to ourselves, and we're not going to get ourselves out of it.
Yeah. So there's room. It's not just that there's room at the table for everyone. It's that everyone is needed.
Correct.
Everyone is needed.
Yeah.
What's been the greatest challenge so far?
The greatest challenge has been figuring out where to go first. You know, what do you involve yourself in? Because, you know, I've come to grips in this in my own mortality, right? My own frailties and how much I can really do. And I feel like I'm a pretty strong guy, but you do get to the point where there's just not enough hours in the day. Yeah. So I think where to go first. You know, I think our president asked me a question about where do we find more people like you? I said, you don't. Yeah. Only 2.7% of the profession roughly are black, and even less women.
Yeah.
So you can't just walk out on the street and find a whole lot of people that look like me to fill those prominent positions. So we have to work on the pipeline. So it made sense, right? It makes sense to increase the number of people in the profession, right, while trying to erase inequities in other places. And so I think that's the hardest thing, just figuring out what's going to have the most impact and where do you start.
So there's this great proverb, there's a Guyanese proverb that says if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, bring someone along with you. And I think what you're saying is you want this to go far and be sustainable, so other people do have to go along. Yeah. You talked a lot about disparity and inequity, particularly in the pipeline. So as you may know, LAUSD did this survey and found only 27% or 27% of African American students, and I believe 26% or less of Hispanic students did not participate in the spring semester of online education. What are your thoughts about that, and how does that play into what your response is, IBI's response is, relative to the pipeline for students of color?
So I think in a firm like ours, we have a broad spectrum, right? We do things like infrastructure and healthcare, and we care about the well-being of our urban environments. And so at the end of the day, I think that the challenge is twofold. It's not just inequity in terms of, you know, getting into the profession. It's, you know, inequity in relation to healthcare, right? Yeah. Access to healthcare, access to open space, access to just the basic things of life, right? And so for us, we are looking at more ways to not only just create a pipeline in the architecture, right? But we have to fix the long-standing racial injustices that are everywhere, right? So whether it's using our model, our healthcare model, to help you know, people in impoverished communities get more access to healthcare or get better services, or these are all things that are on the table for us. But it's where do you start first, right? Like what, you know, is it chicken, is it egg, is it, you know, we're starting where we know because, you know, we're an architecture and engineering firm, but we're also a technology firm. So looking at changing the great divide in just terms of technology access. When you take 2,700 people and you go work from home immediately, you find how quickly the technology divide can separate people, right? We're talking about directors of the firm who had poor internet, right? But they had the ability to go out and buy better internet, right? So how do we solve some of those problems to kind of reduce this divide? So there's a lot of smart people there's a lot of ways that we need to fight this, right? And it's not just about architecture.
So one of the things that I've found fascinating and this was before George Floyd was murdered, but one of the most fascinating things I had learned about IBI Group was the use of parametric design in healthcare. And I think what I found fascinating was that you were utilizing parametric design to model the capacity of hospitals and many of those were actually in highly impacted areas of poverty and just disparity. So it really caused me to realize that firms do have the ability to not just design space, but really think about how space is currently being used and come up with other solutions. And I just found it quite intriguing that IBI was using some of its tools to be able to do that and trying to work in partnership with other organizations to do that.
Well, I think the beauty of who we are as architects, and I think I was talking to a group at the AIA, and we're complex problem solvers. At the heart of what we are, we're complex problem solvers. So not everybody's going to be able to design every facility in every low-income neighborhood, right? Like there's not enough time, there's not enough space. But we can still use our complex problem-solving skills to solve some of the other problems that the society has in terms of injustice, right? There's so many areas of it that you know, and really what this has been for me is it's actually opened me up to tell partners that, you know what, I'm a director in this firm. There's not a whole lot of us. Well, there's I think one in the partnership or looking at the partnership. But at the end of the day, I walk out the door, I'm still black. I'm still subject to the same issues that a young kid in South Central can. You know, I've been followed by the police, followed around grocery stores. So I think that's what surprised them the most, right? Like that when I walk out the door, in here I have standing, I have a place. When I walk out the door, I'm just black.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people forget that.
Yeah.
Or they don't have to think about that.
I have to think about how I dress. I think about how I leave the gym. I have to think about
we had that conversation.
What I tell my sons.
Yeah. I think we've all had that conversation. Right. We've all had that conversation. What advice would you give to a firm, regardless of their size, as they begin this portion of their journey and they're really trying to figure out where do they go? What advice would you give?
100% for us was one of the other things I said. We have to look at ourselves. We can't carry the sword out into the community when our house is broken, right? Like you lose all credibility if somebody can look at your record and look at what you do with people of color in your firm, or black men in your firm, or women, or whatever. If you can't fix your own house first. Now we're doing both in parallel, right? But because we can't wait wait to attack some of the things we know that are wrong. But at the end of the day, we still have to look at ourselves and make sure that we're creating a culture that's inclusive, that is helping the pipeline, that is growing. Because I feel like if we take our sword out and there's, you know, something can be seen that we're working in facilities that are unjust or for clients, then we lose all credibility. And so our message to the community doesn't ring true.
Now, you said you were talking to your partners about this as well. Are you talking about it within the partnership of the company or other business partners like contractors? Define for me what you mean by partners.
I think it's both. Right now I'm talking internally to our partners, but I think just like you know, I've reached a ripe enough age that I don't have a problem with talking to anybody about it now. You know, you can never be secure in your position, but you know, I feel like I've done enough that I'm okay. So we can't be silent anymore. We have to let people know what this feels like, right? And need to let people inside. I have kids that I went to high school with because I was talking to a friend of mine that's a golf instructor the other day and talking about how black people feel on a golf course. For example, what we had to dress the right way, we had to talk the right way, we had to, because we were afraid that if we didn't meet every inch of what the etiquette was, that we wouldn't be allowed on the course.
Correct.
And that continues today, 30 plus years later. So, and so we just need to share that with people,
So real talk, my last question, real talk. What are your fears about this now?
My biggest fear is I'm going to turn around, and these kids really lit me up. My biggest fear is I'm going to hopefully be here 30 years later and nothing's changed, right? Like the kids or the students or the people in our profession, or these things have not changed, right? Like there's things I see in my neighborhood of, signs that are posted on lawns that would tell you things have not changed. And they, I saw a sign on on a lawn that said police lives matter. And I said, well, okay. You know, I've seen things like the George Floyd challenge on Facebook, right? I've seen things, I've seen Twitter where people have talked about, you know, they're not going to watch football because they don't want them talking about race and all this other kinds of stuff. And so there's a big enough segment of the population out there that doesn't want this to change. And so my biggest fear is that it's not going to change, right? And I just don't feel like I can let that happen.
Well, I appreciate you sharing with me both your fears and your challenges, and IBI's approach to addressing justice and equity, diversity, and inclusion. And can you believe it? I'm still out of time.
Yes.
See, it goes fast. I told you I wouldn't torture you.
It's great.
I want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Breaking the Silence of Design. I'm your co-host, Karen Compton, and I want to thank you for joining us today. I invite you to continue to join the conversation on all your social media platforms and follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and on YouTube. Thank you very much.